All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. Obviously, Dallas did not play yesterday. Still an exciting day of football, but I took the time to do some digging. And when you really look into the numbers, it seems as if the Cowboys are close to making a surprising move in terms of one of the most important positions on the field. The stats bear that out. In fact, let's jump into this stat of the day, a palate cleanser, as we always do, as kind of a two-parter to kind of explain what I'm talking about before we get into some pretty interesting updates when it comes to the Cowboys and what's going on this season. So let's pull up this chart I created, and this is the safety snap counts coming out of the bye. There was obviously a few snap counts from Elijah Clark, not a lot, but a couple mixed in there that I discounted. But this is Malik Hooker, Marquise Bell, and Donovan Wilson. And what you'll notice is that, Hooker's in blue, Bell's in red, and Wilson's in gold. Donovan Wilson has played a lot of snaps. He's basically played every safety snap, within reason over the last 4 games. You'll notice Malik Hooker has played a healthy amount, but he hasn't played all of the second safety snaps. In fact, Marquise Bell has jumped in and played a healthy amount in his own right. First against the Raiders, he obviously had that interception, and then a good amount against the Chiefs and against the Detroit Lions. Now, you could make an argument against the Raiders. Well, Hooker was coming back from injury, and the Chiefs were short notice, right? Malik Hooker had some back stuff. But then against the Lions, he played a lot as well. And I think what we're seeing here from the Cowboys is a sign of something very interesting. And I think the Cowboys are very seriously considering moving off of Malik Hooker, making him a release in the offseason for cap purposes. And we'll get to the cap implications here in just a second. But I think what they're doing here is evaluating Marquise Bell and saying, can this guy actually develop into something resembling a competent safety? The reality is with the Dallas Cowboys, Hooker's done a good job at the safety position. I mean, he hasn't been a star, but I would consider him a C-plus kind of player, right? Average to above average, slightly above average, which is fine. But the reality is having an average to above average Malik Hooker, how good has this defense been with him? He's better than, when he wasn't there like he was, for example, against the Broncos or the Arizona Cardinals. But, I mean, to be totally honest, they've had Hooker the vast majority of the season, and they've given up a lot of points this season with Hooker even on the field. So it's clear the Cowboys have to attack other parts of this defense. We understand edge rusher and linebacker are their top priorities right now. And when you look at the Cowboys here and what they've done, and I know Hooker's had some injuries and had some issues, but I think the fact that we haven't heard any word about a pitch count, like my favorite term for regular viewers of the show, any word about, hey, we want to rotate Marquise Bell in just to give Hooker some rest and kind of phase him back into the game after injury. We haven't heard a word about that. We've heard a lot about that this season when it came to guys like Trayvon Diggs, when it came to guys like, of course, DeMarvion Overshown, Chavon Revel, right? All guys coming back from injuries, whether they're rookies, earlier in their careers, or veterans. Hey, listen, we want to have them on a pitch count, kind of ease them in. Basically none of that conversation when it came to Malik Hooker. They said, listen, he's just playing. He's fine. And yet he's not playing a lot of snaps, at least commensurate with what you would expect. So I think what we're seeing here from the Cowboys is they're setting up a big move this offseason. It's not necessarily related to the safety position, but they are planning to move off of Malik Hooker for cap purposes. And that leads me into the second chart here. So this is a potential offseason set of outcomes with their salary cap dollars. And the negative effect is what it would cost against the salary cap, and the positive effect, everything above zero, those blue charts, would be cap saving measures. So they're going to start with a little over $20 million over the cap, the way things set up right now. Again, these are all rough estimates, right? This isn't perfect. There's some fudging of numbers that can happen, of course, between now and March of 2026. But you re-signed George Pickens. I based that off of basically T. Higgins' contract last year with Cincinnati. Obviously, there could be some fluctuation there. And then that third one from the left, sign Trey Hendrickson, right? A veteran guy, and I based it off of his contract last year. I was tempted to base it off of kind of what DeMarcus Lawrence got from the Seattle Seahawks, but I think Hendrickson would want a little bit more money, so I gave him roughly, $5, $6, $7, $8 million per year more than what Lawrence is getting with Seattle based on the deal he got with the Seattle Seahawks, which, by the way, is a steal for Seattle. Great job on their part there. Wish Dallas could have afforded him. They're really missing him this year, but, situation, time to part, it happens, right? Well, nothing but the best for Tank Lawrence. Wish him nothing but the best. But anyway, so you can see now the Cowboys setting up a move to potentially sign Trey Hendrickson or another veteran defensive end of that ilk, right? And how are they going to afford that? That's what everyone's talking about. Well, with the Dak Prescott restructure, releasing Trayvon Diggs, releasing Terrence Steele, and then releasing Malik Hooker, and then you throw in a Quinn Williams restructure or a CeeDee Lamb restructure. You could go either or there, and they're going to be over the cap, or under the cap, a few million bucks. So the Cowboys have a very viable path, obviously, to bringing back George Pickens. We've talked about that a lot over the past few months. but also a very viable path to make a splash move in free agency. And I think a big part of that, however, is deciding what they're going to do at certain positions, right? Do you want defensive end to be what you attack in the draft, or do you want defensive end to be what you attack in the free agency and let safety and linebacker be what you attack in the draft? And I think the Cowboys are looking at where they currently sit with this team, and they say, listen, we can't go draft pick for defensive end right now. We just can't do it, right? We've got Ezuraku worked out, but our defensive line track record, our defensive end track record is a little bit mixed, right? Sam Williams was, obviously a draft pick, not exactly panned out. You can go all the way back to the Taco Charlton days, right? There's been a lot of mixed record. Now, I do think they could still consider doing it anyway, but I think they're opening up the opportunities here, moving off of Malik Hooker, going, really young, trying to, scrap it together at safety and get a whole lot better at defensive end. And I don't hate that plan. The reality is this Cowboys defense with veteran safeties Wilson and Malik Hooker has been bad this season with both of them on the field. Now, I don't think Donovan Wilson's a great player. I think he plays a lot of snaps because he's able and willing to go in the box, and he's kind of got the right mentality, culture set that Sharpe likes. But in terms of talent and performance, he's not there. But even though Malik Hooker's a decent player, I don't think it's one of those things where the Cowboys can afford to continue to be as bad at edge rushing as they've been this season. Now, Jadeveon Clowney has been nice, and Ezuraku has a lot of talent. But the reality is, we're talking about a team that listen, Jadeveon Clowney has, 3-4 sacks? Ezuraku has 2. Right, those are not great numbers for where we are right now, 13 games through the season. So you're going to need a whole lot more production, and I think they're going to want to go with a veteran guy, is my guess. Maybe veteran and a rookie. They may do both, veteran and draft pick, which I wouldn't necessarily hate because it's a real problem, and I think they understand they got to address it, and I think they're planning on making a big move this offseason. And if you look at what they're doing with snap counts, I think they're telling you the tale right there, getting Marquise Bell more opportunities, Malik Hooker less. I think they're trying to evaluate how soon they can move off of Malik Hooker, and I think come the offseason, they're going to make that decision and cut him for salary cap purposes. Again, if he was free, they let it ride. But I think they're trying to figure out now, okay, can Marquise Bell just play safety? Can he actually line up and do that? I think that's a real concern if you have to make that assessment, because I don't think Bell is doing a great job. But it's a discussion the Cowboys are having because I think they're planning to make a massive move in free agency at the defensive end position. All right, let's get into the news here. So there's been a discussion going around about Chavon Revel and the Cowboys scheme. And obviously, Eberflus deserves plenty of criticism for everything he's done as a defensive coordinator, and his personnel decisions and things like that, and obvious scheme changes and everything this season, right? So there's a lot of criticism to go around for one of the worst defenses in football this entire year. However, I think there's been a topic about Chavon Revel. There's been a lot of people, content creators, commentators, and everybody saying Revel needs to play more press man. He needs to play more press man. That's what he was really good at in college. He should be good at that in the NFL. That's something he's just naturally good at, supposedly. Even though when he played press man one-on-one against Detroit, he immediately got flagged for defensive pass interference. But that's one play, anecdotal, of course. But the reality is, everyone's saying he should play press man. But here's what people don't understand, and this is what I posted on X. The surface level take. Dallas should play more press man because Chavon Revel Jr. should be good at that. Higher level take. If Dallas plays more press man, that means more plays where Reddy Stewart, Kenneth Murray, Logan Wilson, and Donovan Wilson are man on man. That would be bad. And that is the important thing to consider here. You sit there and say we want to have Revel play more press man. There's a lot of people saying that. But that means Reddy Stewart's man on man. Guys, did you see a few plays where Reddy Stewart was man on man with Amon-Ra St. Brown? Oh my gosh, not even the same zip code. How about Kenneth Murray one-on-one on running backs and tight ends? Do you really want to see that? You want to see Jahmyr Gibbs have 200 yards receiving in a game? Leave Kenneth Murray on him the entire game. Logan Wilson, same thing. And that's not a knock on Wilson. He's actually pretty good in coverage. It's just linebackers one-on-one in those situations. It's a nightmare. How about Donovan Wilson? You want to see Donovan Wilson one-on-one against tight ends and running backs and slot receivers all day? Or you can even throw Marquise Bell on that mix if you want to be honest as well. Throw him in there. The reality is, if you play press man, if you play man on man, you're not just playing one guy man on man and everybody else's zone, right? That's how it works. You got a defensive scheme and a defensive strategy. And you can argue it's a good team strategy. You can argue it's a bad team strategy. And I think there's a lot more evidence that points to bad than good. But the reality is, just because one rookie player, supposedly, there's no evidence yet, by the way. People say should be better at press man. We haven't seen it yet. And there's one big-time primetime game where he played press man. He gave up a big pass interference penalty. Maybe he'll be really good at it. Maybe he won't. We don't know. I talked about it the other day. Good players are generally good at everything they do, and I think Revel's got a really bright future. Just making him do press man, I think, is kind of silly. But that's a different argument. The reality here is, if you're going to play that press man, if you're going to play man-on-man coverage, you're going to leave guys on islands, and you're going to create disaster scenarios. And I'll give you an example of what happened yesterday. And I was watching the Bengals Buffalo Bills game. It was a perfect example of this. So the Bengals sort of had a game where things were breaking their way. Joe Burrow was dealing. Things were going fantastic. The Bills were going in to score a touchdown, and they fumbled going in. It was a touchback for Cincinnati. Huge play, obviously. They got a fourth down stop, right? They didn't force the entire game. It's a bad Bengals defense, of course, but they were doing just enough, and the offense was dealing. But there was a situation, they're up 28-18, up by 10. And they're in around midfield Buffalo is, and they decided to do press man across the board. Right, Buffalo's moving football on them all day, but right now they're up by 10. They decide to do press man and bring a blitzer off the edge. Josh Allen steps up and he's gone. 40-yard touchdown. No one's near him. Linebackers totally lost contained. Defensive end totally lost contained. All right, then the Bengals throw a pick six, and then a few things happen, go back and forth. The Bills score another touchdown to go up by 2 scores. The Bengals score to get back in the game, but all right, one play to make a stop. 3rd and 15. So what do the Bengals play? They play press man across the board, man coverage. No help. Josh Allen steps up in the pocket, makes the linebackers look silly, runs for 20 yards and a game-clinching first down. Now that's Josh Allen, that's the Buffalo Bills, but that's one game, one evidential point. But the reality is, playing press man in a situation for Cincinnati meant their linebackers, which are not very good. Dallas and Cincinnati are in a battle this season for the worst linebacker play in football. It put them in situations with no help against Josh Allen. What do you call that? No help against the tight ends. 1-on-1 against the tight ends. Anyone watching that game saw the tight ends for Buffalo were wide open for 30, 40-yard chunk plays at a time. It was easy pickings. So it's one of those things where, what are you willing to give up? Do you want to sit there and say, yeah, we want Revel to learn to be a multifaceted corner? Or do we want to watch tight ends and running backs get 400 yards a day on us all day long in 30, 40-yard chunks? I'd rather teach Revel to play corner the complete way. That's just my take. That's just my opinion. Maybe you disagree, and that's fine. But I think this notion that, you can just have one player do this one thing on defense just is a false narrative, right? If you're going to play a man coverage, you're going to be a man team, which means Reddy Stewart, Logan Wilson, Kenneth Murray, Donovan Wilson, Marquise Bell, all these guys are going to be man on man. And I don't think that long-term, obviously certain plays it makes sense, but long-term, if that's your strategy, that doesn't lead to success. All right, this next report here was courtesy of Alex Smith on ESPN, doing a good job here. Alex Smith, again, reasonable voice. He says George Pickens got everybody open. Alex Smith reacts to the Cowboys after their Thursday Night Football loss to the Lions. Yeah, absolutely. Now, CeeDee Lamb was dusting him too, but Ferguson, outside of his fumble, actually had a pretty good game, all things considered. Even Schoonmaker got in the mix, right? There was a few good screen passes. You even had, of course, Flanoy had over 100 yards receiving and had that big play to get him, within 1 score, get him within 3 late in the 4th quarter. So it became one of those games where it was very clear the Lions, especially after going into the game, but especially after CeeDee Lamb's injury, said, listen, we're just going to do everything we can to take away Pickens. And then everyone else was just wide open. And that is the effect of a good player. And anyone watching the game that was like, Pickens is shut down, he's uninterested. Listen, one of the things they tell receivers, if you feel yourself being doubled, if you're totally bracketed and a lot of attention's on you, don't do anything. Don't exhaust yourself. Don't run yourself into more coverage, right? Now, there is a fine line between not actually trying to run the route, but if you're running, let's say, a slant or something like that, or a curl, if you're Pickens, and you've got a corner over the top and they're buzzing a linebacker or safety underneath or vice versa, you're not going to go through the route and just run right into coverage and sit there. Right, you're going to kind of it's sort of like if you're getting double teamed in basketball, you go, okay, I'm just going to go sit over there at the corner of the 3-point line, right, way off over there and get the one-on-one matchups, right, pull people away, right. That's sort of the same mentality. So anyone who was watching the game and oh my goodness, Pickens ran a wrong, lazy route there or something like that. Guys, if you're getting double teamed at wide receiver, it's like if you're getting double teamed in basketball. Just push, get away. Get away from the crowd, creates the one-on-one opportunities, creates more space, and that's what we saw with the Cowboys offense. Credit to Alex Smith for actually, again, smart guy, obviously long career, really, really good dude by all accounts as well. But again, this isn't rocket science. Anyone watching the game that wasn't being a fool or just trying to drive a huge amount of engagement for whatever reason could clearly understand that was happening. Now, it still was Pickens' worst game. He did have that deflected pass interception. He did have that offensive pass interference that I think it was a flop by the Lions, but you can make an argument that's his fault. He did have the face mask call on the slant, which was a tough break there. It just was a game where so much this season has gone right for Pickens. It was a game where so many things went wrong for number 3, and I expect him to bounce back in a big way. I really do. I do think he was affected by Lamb's concussion. I think that had a bigger effect on a lot of the Cowboys than people think. It's certainly with Pickens because as close he is to CeeDee Lamb. But the reality is, watching the game, and if you look at the film, and you look at what Detroit did, it was literally all about, taking away Pickens. We're not going to let George Pickens beat us. And they almost let Ryan Flanoy beat them. So, and Dallas still scored 30 points, and that's with, all their other issues going on. I think they punted once the entire game, Dallas did. I mean, you punt once in a game on the road against a good team, that's not on the offense. Certainly not on Prescott, and certainly not on Pickens. All right, this next report here is from me. There you go, busy day, but it's talking about the Washington Commanders and their performance against the Minnesota Vikings, who look good against Washington, beat them 31-0. Wow, makes this upcoming matchup a little more interesting now, doesn't it? When you see Minnesota look that good defensively, special teams, offensively, McCarthy had a good game. They ran the football well. It's going to be I tell you what, this is a tough matchup upcoming for Dallas for sure. Minnesota playing their best ball after what they did against Washington. But I want to talk about Dan Quinn, because Dan Quinn's been a guy, obviously, with Dallas' defensive struggles in 2024 and continued even to a greater extent in 2025. There's been a lot of talk about Dan Quinn and his guys and his staff and how much the Cowboys miss him and this, that, or the other thing. Well, Dan Quinn, obviously known primarily for being the guy who blew the 28-3 lead to Brady and the Patriots in the Super Bowl a number of years ago, is known for being a really good turnaround artist, and he was. He turned around Dallas' defense, although in the long term it wasn't a recipe for success, and he turned around Washington last year, supposedly. But there's a problem with Dan Quinn, and we saw it against Minnesota. So Jayden Daniels is their star young quarterback. He's a really great player. If there's a knock on Daniels in terms of his, physically, it's that he's thin and concerns about frailty, right? Thin, small quarterbacks don't last long in the NFL. They get beat up, and he's kind of lived that up to this point already this season. And Jayden Daniels, I think for the fourth time yesterday, left the game due to injury. Now the reports say, listen, it was precautionary and all this, that. Like, listen, what are you doing if you're Dan Quinn? What are you doing? And this is what I wrote. For what I believe is the fourth time this season, Jayden Daniels is leaving a game with an injury. Washington is 3-10, and Dan Quinn refuses to shut him down. Remember when Mike Shannon was fired for doing it once with RG3 in a playoff game? Nonetheless, how can a head coach do something so foolish? Yeah, I honestly don't understand this. I really don't. You talk about horrific personnel management. Your quarterback, most important player on your team, young quarterback. You're 3-10. Even if you had beaten Minnesota, you'd be 4-9, right? You're going to have a losing season. You're not going to make the playoffs, right? Obviously. So what are you doing? The best you could hope for at that point is to run the table and get to 8-9, right? Which is okay. I guess it's not the worst thing in the world, but that's the best case scenario. Jayden Daniels had already had multiple injuries, knocked out against the Packers, knocked out against Dallas. I forget what I want to say. Detroit maybe was the other game he got knocked out late, but maybe I'm misremembering. It was one game around that time for Washington, and then there was another game, this game against the Vikings, where he got knocked out. It's like at a certain point, when do you shut it down when it doesn't matter anymore? You say, well, it's a competitor. He needs to develop. Not if he's hurt. He's clearly banged up. He's clearly hurt. The offense is having some issues right now, to put it mildly. What are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to prove? And this is the difference between people that live in short-term thinking and long-term thinking, okay? We talked about it against the Lions, where Dallas, Jadeveon Clowney, not 100%, shut it down. Trayvon Diggs, shut it down, right? Not gonna risk it. Kalen Carson, same thing against the Chiefs on Thanksgiving, shut it down, not worth it, right? What did the Lions do? Brian Branch has been dealing with toe and ankle stuff all week long. It's been a tough road to hoe. All right, let him play. Tore his Achilles, out for the season. Really hurts the Lions defense the rest of the year. How about Amon-Ra St. Brown? He's got a sprained ankle, right? Gets shot up with painkillers, I believe, personally. I don't know for certain, of course, but, kind of reading between the lines with some of the reporting, it certainly seems he was on some sort of medication. But anyway, going on a sprained ankle with medication like that, risk of, severe injuries like Achilles and things like that are much, much higher. The Lions didn't care. Short-term thinking. No, listen, they won the game and they're in a great spot the rest of the season. I think especially after the Bears lost against Green Bay, I think the Lions can go into Chicago and beat the Bears again and kind of take control of the second spot in that division. I think the Lions are a good team. I really do, especially at home. Really good team at home. But the reality is, it's a difference between short-term thinking and long-term thinking. And you always want to be long-term thinking. The genius of Bill Belichick with the Patriots dynasty is they had this uncanny ability, even in the most critical short-term moments, Super Bowls, championship games, playoffs, late in the season, always be thinking the long term. Always. And what that allowed the Patriots to do, obviously the greatness of Brady had a huge role in this, of course, but it allowed them to never sacrifice the success of one season for the success of the next two. And the Washington Commanders are perilously close to doing that. Now, listen, I'm not rooting for Washington, obviously, but I think we got to take a step back as Cowboys fans and seeing what's going on in some of these other organizations, and specifically the Commanders. And listen, I hope Jane Daniels is 100% healthy. I hope he has no more injuries the rest of his career. I mean, I think we all hope for that. He's a great player. He's an exciting player. You know, if he didn't play for Washington, I'd be rooting for him probably. But the reality is, this is just horrific personnel management. And again, long-term thinking versus short-term thinking. One of the things I like about Shoddy, and I think a little bit Mike McCarthy had this as well with injuries, and maybe Shoddy got this from McCarthy, is that they do not fall into the trap with injuries of you need to push for now. Every game is a playoff game. You have to win this game. If you're playing a must-win game in the first week of December, you're not a Super Bowl team, most likely. You're just not, right? Must-win games for Super Bowl teams, they happen in January. They happen in the playoffs, right? Because these other teams that are real Super Bowl contenders, I look at the Rams, right? They can lose another game or two. They'll be fine. Look at the Broncos in the AFC. They lose a game or two. They'll be fine, right? You look across the board here. The top-flight championship caliber team, the Seahawks, right? I could argue even the Eagles, if they can get it together on offense, consistently. They certainly have the players to do it. But the reality is that the teams that are legit Super Bowl contenders, they can lose a game in December. They can lose a game or two in November or October, and they'll be fine. The Packers are like this. Yesterday was not a must-win game for the Packers. They're going to be a Super Bowl team, contending team talent-wise regardless. It was a big game, but it wasn't a must-win game. And they didn't treat it like a must-win game. A lot of teams, however, Detroit against Dallas, Ravens against the Steelers against Ravens, both sides there, treated it like a must-win, treated it like a playoff game. And when you have that mentality, that really short-termism mentality, you're just fooling yourself. You're tricking yourself. And I think under Jason Garrett, the Cowboys had that mentality. McCarthy, to his credit, never bought into that. I think that's one of the smartest things he did. It allowed the team to avoid what could have been even more disastrous injuries, right? They'd sacrifice a loss or performance here or there to keep the long-term team in track. At least trying to get to the postseason healthy was more his goal, or get late season healthy was more his goal. But still, long-term thinking. And that's what the Cowboys have with Shoddy as well. And compared to guys like Dan Quinn, it's a much better approach to be. Because if you're the Commanders right now, if you're a Commanders fan, you're looking at an old roster with not a lot of draft capital and a quarterback that's been banged up 4 times in 13 games. Not a good sign. And a good quarterback too. It's not like he's average. He's a really good player. All right, talking about the George Pickens drama a little bit more. So I guess Shannon Sharpe has a podcast or some kind of show. And this was saw this on X. He said Shannon Sharpe. I guess this is a Shannon Sharpe parody account where he just kind of reposts what Shannon Sharpe talks about. Shannon Sharpe sounds off on George Pickens after he responded to Richard Sherman's post-game comments in a negative way, and Sharpe was very critical of George Pickens. Now, listen, I think one of the things you can tell in life, and one of the lessons I've learned as I've gotten a little bit older, is you can tell, where the right position is, where you should be on certain things in life, based on who agrees with you and sort of the cohort of people that speak out in favor of or in against, right? It's one of those things, right? If you have a position on anything, sports, whatever, and you're like, and you state your position, this is the way it is. And then you realize that all of the people that are the worst people or the dumbest people all agree with you. That's a sign, right? That's a sign. That's an indicator. That's what we call an indicator, guys. And I think most people understand that. And what's very interesting, and I talked about this with Richard Sherman, a guy who called out Pickens' maturity and a lot of other things related to his character, to be honest. And Richard Sherman, and I pointed it out, and a quick Google search will obviously confirm all this stuff, that Richard Sherman has had numerous questionable incidences in his own character, not as some 25-year-old, but as like a grown 30-year-old man, already worth millions of dollars, already in the media, all that kind of stuff. And Shannon Sharpe takes it to a whole nother level. Shannon Sharpe is in his 50s. He's been in the media for a long, long, long time. He's been in the media almost as long as Shannon Sharpe has been in the media almost as long as George Pickens has been alive. And it's a quick Google search as well will unveil all of Shannon Sharpe's personal issues. And I'll leave it at that. Go into the details. You guys, if you want, can search it on your own time. But to me, all of the most, I'll call it, questionably moral people are coming out against Pickens, and all of the people I would consider, good dudes, smart football people are coming out in support. And that's a sign. That's an indicator, right? Not just internal to the Cowboys. Shoddy supporting, Jerry Jones supporting, all these guys supporting, right? A lot of fans are supporting. I think 99% of fans are supporting. I think anyone who doesn't, I think is sort of an anomaly. Maybe it's a bot. Maybe it's just an instigator. Those exist, of course, especially on social media. But all the worst people are coming out against Pickens. And to me, that's a sign that Pickens is fine, right? You will know where you stand on certain issues, whether you've got a good stance or not, based on who joins you in that stance. And right now, the most questionable people in sports media are coming out against Pickens very aggressively, and that's something to note. All right, this next report here, courtesy of Brett Coleman, who's a great YouTuber and follow on X for NFL content. He's a A+, so if you're looking for someone to follow, he does a lot of deep dives, does some film stuff. It's entertaining, it's interesting. I highly recommend you give him a follow if you don't already. But I lost to Detroit. He posted this, and I kind of want to talk about this briefly. He says, the season is effectively over for the Cowboys after tonight. Didn't go the way they wanted, but two things I can say right now is that Shawnee coached his ass off this season, and Dak earned every penny of that $60 million. 2026 looks bright, health permitting. And this is a good point, because we talk about the defense and the issues there and some concerns about tackle long-term and some other flaws, as there always is with every team. There's always going to be issues. But the two most important things to get right are coach and quarterback. Right. And to be fair, I would say quarterback right now looks like good. I'd say coach looks good. And the working relationship together, which is just as important, also looks good. Now, is it outstanding? Did Dak Prescott have the greatest season of his career? No. Like, he's a guy that, he's had turnovers in a lot of games. A lot of them aren't his fault, but he's also had some, dropped picks that could have been his fault. And, so he's his sort of kind of the ball don't lie effect, which we'll get to in a second, actually, where like he's had a guy drop a pick one week potentially, and then he gets a bad luck interception the next. So it's kind of worked back and forth with Prescott. But he's had a very nice season, Pro Bowl caliber season, obviously. Shawnee has done overall a good job. He's modernized the offense. We'll have more data this week. I've been doing some digging and some research to put some stuff together to really compare him to Cowboys offenses under Prescott that have been very prolific over the past 7-8 years or so, and the data looks pretty good from Shawnee's perspective. Modernizing the offense. You're talking about motion, shifts, play action. They've been doing all of that stuff at a much higher rate, integrating new pieces, young offensive line, super young offensive line. You got a rookie, you got 2 second-year guys. You throw Nathan Thomas in there, you can argue a third second-year guy, right? New running back room completely, right? Obviously Pickens, right? There's a lot of new pieces, a lot of young pieces dealing with injuries across the board, and they've been obviously very, very good. Another young piece, how about Flanoy, right? Throw another young guy in there, right? So it's been one of those things where Shawnee has certainly done a good job with the offense and the culture side, the trying to kill the country club atmosphere, bringing in an energy, a buzz, dealing with the Neyland tragedy. All of that has been really good. There's been some bad, but overall, I would say net good for Shawnee, net good for Prescott. And I think this is an important point here made by Coleman that says, listen, if you've got coach right, coaching doing a good job, and you've got quarterback right, and they work well together, there's a lot of things most NFL teams don't have that, or at least half the league doesn't. You're better right now than maybe the Atlanta Falcons, for example. There's concerns, what are the Giants going to do? I like the Giants. What are the Giants going to do? What are the, Commanders going to do with their injuries, right? What are the issues with Jane Daniels? You go to, look across, the entire NFL. You find a bunch of teams where there's questions at coach and there's questions at quarterback. The Dallas Cowboys have those two. I mean, not that there was really any serious question about Prescott. There was maybe some people that, didn't understand football well enough that doubted him. But Prescott looks solid. Shawnee looks solid. And the working relationship looks solid. Those important elements right there, those boxes have been checked. And if that's all that happens this season, that's a success. All right, this next report here is courtesy of Adam Schefter. Switching gears slightly, talking college football. Notre Dame announced it is declining to play in any bowl game, and they put out a statement after not making the playoff, after not making the Final 12. They said, as a team, we've decided to withdraw our name from consideration for a bowl game following the 2025 season. We appreciate all the support from our families and fans, and we're hoping to bring the 12th national title to South Bend in 2026, the 2025 Notre Dame football team. So like I said a second ago, there's a saying, ball don't lie. I get this a lot in basketball. You attack the rim, you don't get fouled, you miss the layup, and the ref calls a foul. And then you miss both free throws, right? That's a ball not lying. Ball don't lie, right? You weren't fouled. You didn't deserve to go to the free throw line. And then you miss the 2 free throws. That's just, karma, the universe, whatever you want to call it, saying, yeah, man, ball don't lie. And the College Football Playoff Committee right here, not getting Notre Dame into the playoff, this is a ball don't lie moment right there. Because if you have an organization, these are the adults, right? I understand the kids may be emotional, these college kids, but the athletic director's staff, the head coach and his staff, Marcus Freeman, who I really like, by the way. But I can't get over how bad this is. This is just horrendous leadership. This is program destroying. It really is. It's culture destroying. This is, I didn't get what I want, so I take my ball and go home. Forget that bowl games are an opportunity for players to get more practices, to go to a cool place, get a bunch of swag, get a bunch of gear. It's a great, it's one of those things where it's a great moment for these players, memories forever. People talk about bowl games being a special part of college football before the playoff because it was like, man, you go to a city you've never been before with all your best friends, all your teammates, you go to all these events, you go to all these, cool, fun stuff, and you play in a game on national TV. It's just awesome atmosphere, right? Usually around the holidays, so it's got that vibe. It's a fantastic experience, and it's one of the greatest parts of college football. You get all these cool storylines, right? You may have a guy that's sitting out because he's getting ready for the NFL. That's cool. Then you got a young freshman comes in, and suddenly he lights it up, and now the future looks bright because you got a star emerging, right? All these great elements of the bowl game sequence with college football, and Notre Dame's just like, no, we're upset because we're little children. We're immature. It's one of those things. People talked about Sherman and people talked about Shannon Sharpe criticizing Pickens. This is immaturity, right? Just like what Pickens and Sharpe are. Because this is the grown-ups. This is the head coach, who's a grown man, obviously. This is his staff, grown men. This is the athletic department, grown men. Like, I'll let 20-year-olds, 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds, 18-year-olds, I'll let them slide for being emotional and upset and obstinate. Because I know I sure was, and a lot more worse things than that at that age. But to sit here as adults, the second after you don't get in to put this out, it's one thing if you wait a week and say, listen, we as a staff have sat down and we've decided we want to get recruiting. We want to be on the recruiting trail. And I think that would be a stupid move to make, but I could at least understand the logic, right? Because you sat down and said, okay, we didn't make the playoffs, so we sat down as a staff and athletic department, evaluated everything, and like, okay, it's best for the program if we don't do a bowl game. But to do it right after, that's just grown men being emotional in the moment and making a bad decision for their program. Poor job by Notre Dame, but in this case, the playoff committee, they got it right. The ball don't lie. All right, let's get into the comment section here, guys. This first comment is from It's Juma 3231. I think Demo and Marist play the most aggressive in the linebacker room, and to me, the biggest knock to Flus right now is the fact that our linebackers look lost 90% of the time. And Flus started as a linebacker coach. I agree. I do think a lot of it is the players, but if he can't develop James and Marist into good LBs and he can't coach, if somehow Flus gets fired, I need Shoddy and Jerry calling Al Harris to be this DC. He's been in the building with a lot of these players, so the continuity issue shouldn't be too bad. I agree with the comment about Cowboys fans, though. I think the Cowboys have more hater who say they're fans than actual fans. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of trolls and things like that on social media for sure. I do think the linebacker room, I'm less concerned about the scheme and the coverage schemes in the secondary than the linebacker room and the development. I think Overshown's been fine since he's come back in this film. He just flies off the tape. I talked about it a few days ago. It's like, why isn't Overshown being blitzed more? I do think he should be, but you watch him just in coverage or normal stuff. I can see why he doesn't want to because, listen, you watch this guy just hawk people down and go sideline to sideline, and the speed and the athleticism and the aggression he plays with. I mean, it's one of those things where you just, it's an incredible thing to watch. His energy is off the chart. So I can understand why Flu says, listen, we want to have him cover people. We want to have him in space because he's just an animal. And I don't disagree with that. Now, I do think he should be blitzed more, but, that's a point where I can sit there and see both sides of it. Same thing with the secondary. It's like, listen, I understand people don't like the scheme, and I talked about that earlier in this video and things like that, but I kind of get what they're trying to do, right? You don't want to be Cincinnati and do, that where you just play hyper-aggressive man coverage and, put everyone in a terrible position, right? And that's not a recipe for sustained success. You can squeeze out a win here or there doing that, but you got to be a balanced defense. You got to play that good team defense if you want to be a Super Bowl team. So I get that. Now it goes back to the right messenger, wrong messenger argument, but I get all of that. What's happened at linebacker, though, that's totally inexcusable, right? Obviously, Kenneth Murray has been terrible this season. Logan Wilson, since coming to the Dallas Cowboys, has also been quite terrible. Well, there's some people that sit there and say, like, well, he's only been there for 4 games, and I get it, but he's also a veteran. This isn't a rookie. Like, I would not be criticizing Shamar James if by week 4, if he had first 4 games, he was like, yeah, he can't play ball. Logan Wilson is a veteran. He's seen all this before, right? He's not a young guy. He's not a guy who's never played football before. Quinn Williams has showed up and done really good things. Really good things. Right? He's a veteran. Like, we've seen this before. Guys get in the trade deadline, and if they're good players that we find out right away, they're good impact players. Wilson, so far through 4 games, has been quite awful. And like I talked about yesterday, I think the Cowboys are kind of calling him out a little bit. They're like, listen, you got to step up. But part of that is on Eberflus. He's a linebackers guy by trade. Right? The whole point of the Eberflus hire, I thought the best point, I should say, was that he could develop and work with the Cowboys linebackers and improve that room that had been a big weakness. And so far, it doesn't seem to be the case. Now, Leofau, I think, is good in certain situations. I don't want Leofau playing a lot because his skill set, he's sort of a thrill-a-minute game wrecker, flying around kind of guy, and I like that. But I think he's a liability in certain situations, so I think they're using him roughly the right amount you should, probably, give or take a little bit. I do think he's actually utilized in the right cases there. I think what he does with Leofau is the right move, kind of a disruptive force in certain snaps a game, certain packages a game. I think the development of Shamar James, I think, is going to be important. I think Shamar James has done some good things. But again, he's a fifth-round rookie, right? We're not talking about like a second-round pick. We're not talking about like Ezraku here or Booker, right? A first-round guard. We're talking about a fifth-round rookie. Fifth-rounders, the hit rate on fifth-rounders is right around like 10%, less than 10%. So again, we're not talking like a must-get-right kind of thing. But overall, linebacker has been bad for Dallas for sure. Next comment here is from David Dobbins, 5887. That bunny has a happy Easter on it, talking about the Eagles' funny vibes, bunny rabbit they put in their locker room. Yeah, it's kind of a weird deal there. I keep looking for something to debunk that image. I never could find anything. It almost, at this point, almost feels like it has to be real for the Eagles, which is kind of embarrassing for them. But if they win, of course, on Monday Night Football, and they go on to do great things this postseason, then everyone will forget that. It's the way it works. Winning is a great deodorant, as the late, great John Madden used to say. Stephen Van Over writes, Jerry Jones' head coaching selection acumen. If I may, Jerry, post-JJ era, is a 500 owner. The focus on giving Jerry credo for anything/everything is embarrassing. The fixation with Jerry News is baffling. He lies, his owner's mission, and he does not know football. My grandma could be a 500 GM. Please focus on the team. Lauding Landry for hiring the coaches who are panned here every week is a glaring contradiction. This is becoming the I Love Jerry channel. Oh, okay? And that is sad. I hope this is a blip rather than a trend when talking football instead of helping excuse Jerry. This channel is exceptional. A lot of people want to destroy Jerry Jones. Come on, man. I want to give him credit for the job he does. He's the best 500 ball owner in sports. Jerry is putting the Landry Schramm 20-year winning record to shame with his 26-year run of 500 ball. Kudos to mediocrity. All hail Jerry Jones. So I think this is some response, I'm assuming it is, and if I'm mischaracterizing it, you can please correct me, to my sort of stat of the day commentary yesterday when I said, listen, in the Jerry Jones era, all but one of the coaches Jones has hired has had a 500 or better record with the Dallas Cowboys. Jimmy Johnson, Barry Switzer, Chan Gailey, Dave Campo obviously didn't, Bill Parcells, then you had Wade Phillips, Jason Garrett, and Mike McCarthy. That's 7. In the Super Bowl era, remember the Jerry Jones era only started in 1989, the next coach's team is 6, or the next closest team, is 6, with coaches that have a 500 or better record. By my count, obviously, maybe I made a mistake there. And I just made the point, says, listen, if you want to make a statistical argument against Jerry, the way he's hired the head coaching position has actually, if you look at the numbers, has been good. Now, if you don't like the numbers, that's fine. If you don't like Jerry Jones as an owner, that's fine. If you think he's made a lot of mistakes, that's fine. And that's 100% correct. He has made a lot of mistakes. But the guy does have 3 Super Bowl rings, and the guy has been a part of a lot of winning seasons. Now, you can sit there and say the reason they haven't won more championships is because Jerry Jones. There's an argument to be made there for sure. But don't let your hatred, your just blind disgust with Jerry Jones, diffuse the fact that there are a lot worse situations in the National Football League, and a lot of organizations have done a lot worse. And maybe Jerry Jones will get even worse. Who knows? But remember, he's the guy that pulled the trigger to trade for Quinn and Williams and trade for George Pickens, 2 great additions. Right? He's a guy that's made not some not so great moves, to put it very bluntly, but he's a guy who's made some pretty solid moves. Right? He's a guy that, listen, a lot of people looked at the shoddy hire as a disaster, and maybe it will be long term. But right now, if you listen to the people, whether it's the commentators like Coleman, people like Romo, or people like a lot of Cowboys fans watching what's going on with the culture, things like that, and the offensive changes, they're like, hey, he's done a lot better than expected. So again, we're not saying Jerry Jones is A+. I'm not saying that as a GM. He's not the executive of the year. But this consistent bashing of Jerry Jones at every single opportunity, I think, is a little misguided. Because you start looking into the numbers and you put biases aside. Now, obviously, everyone has biases, and you're looking for confirmation of your biases. That's just human nature. It's just going to be what it's going to be. But the reality is, at a certain point, you have to look aside and say, okay, Jerry Jones has made a lot of mistakes, and he's very flawed as an executive, as an owner. But there's also things he did well. And I think in just when it comes to fandom, when it comes to sports, when it comes to life in general, if you let your biases and feelings of one man, individual, or association of a company, of any sort of organization, and you sit there and say everything they do is bad, or everything that person does is bad, or everything that person does is stupid, you're blinding yourself to reality, right? You're basically shutting yourself off from critical thought. And that's a bad position to be in as a person and as a society. And I think that's one of the problems we have, if I'm being totally honest. Person X is bad. Therefore, everything they say or do is bad.
That's basically what our society has become, whether sports, politics, business, culture, religion, you name it. Person Y is not on my team, therefore everything he does is bad and stupid, and he's a bad person, and everyone who agrees with that person is bad or stupid. Is that an effective way to operate as a culture, as a society, as a country, as a fandom, down to that level? I don't think so. Put our biases aside and look at the numbers and come up with evaluations. Look at the eye test, scientific method. I think we can be much more, I'll say this, efficient, because I'll use that word, as a society if we put aside biases and discomforts and look at cold, hard reality and cold, hard facts and come up with a clear picture of the situation. Things aren't black and white. Jerry Jones isn't the best owner of all time. He's not the best GM of all time. He's also not the worst. There's shades of gray in everything. And we have to be willing to be honest with ourselves and with others when we're approached with facts and data points that confront our stances. You know, earlier this season, I was very critical of everyone who was saying the Cowboys need to play a little bit more man coverage. They need to play a little bit more man coverage. I said, no, I don't hate the fact that Eberflus is playing so much zone. And they started integrating more man coverage, and the defense played a little bit better. And I came out at the time and said, listen, I was wrong. More man was the way to go, right? And I maybe be wrong with the press man thing, right? Maybe they play a lot more press man, and it turns out fantastic. And if that happens, I will admit I am wrong. You know, maybe they'll play Logan Wilson more and he'll start playing great and he'll be a great player. And maybe I'll be wrong there. And I'll admit it wholeheartedly. I'm waiting for the data points. And if that happens, I will admit it. But we have to be willing to admit when we're wrong or admit when our biases and sort of our predilections to certain situations, people, teams, whatever, points us in a direction where we become blind to facts and reality. Because when that happens, you're just going to be just stuck in your opinion. And your opinion just becomes who you are. You know, I think Joe Rogan says it best. It's like, you are not your ideas. Right? Your ideas are just ideas. And I think that's the approach we should take for everything in life, and certainly when it comes to fandom for the Dallas Cowboys. All right, this next comment here, we got a 2-for-1 here from Buddha Namaste 597. Question, Nick, can number 0 play middle linebacker? Well, I mean, he kind of already does, right? It's a 2 linebacker set structure, right? Modern NFL, you don't really have the old school like 4-3 where you would have a traditional middle linebacker, a strong side and a weak side. So it's sort of interior linebacker and outside linebacker. There was some reporting that Overshown was the backup green dot for the Dallas Cowboys against Detroit. So this is something to keep an eye on, and I'm waiting for more information on this. The one thing that I will excuse Eberflus completely on, and this will be a huge feather in his cap if he does this, and I haven't heard any reporting yet, so I'm not there yet. But if he's developing Overshown to be the green dot, to be the leader, to be the captain, and he's sort of sticking with Murray and Wilson just to kind of hold down long enough until Overshown's ready, right? It's one of those things. Again, that doesn't excuse everything he's doing at the linebacker position, but that would actually be an A-plus move from Eberflus if he's actually doing that. Definitely something to keep an eye on there. Buddha Namas, there we go, 2-for-1, like I said. I hear you, SMI, but I'd rather Pickens be like Randy, but have a heart like T.O. have a heart like T.O. because Randy gives up on his team, and he has given up on his team. You know, you bring up a great point. T.O. gets such a bad rap in the media, man. I mean, talking about high effort guy, high motor guy who cared. Now, he did have, you know, obviously some issues and things like that. But the reality is, I think both were great players. I'd take either one of them, obviously. But I think if Pickens is T.O. or Randy Moss, obviously you take it. You take it 100 times out of 100. You know, there are people like, oh, my goodness, he's an old prima donna receiver. Reminds me of T.O. in Dallas. Dallas had 3 straight winning seasons with T.O., 2 playoff berths. So, number 1 overall seed. So, again, if that's what if George Pickens becomes T.O. with the Dallas Cowboys, worse things have happened. All right, D7379 writes, there's a lot of times all 7 of the back end look extremely confused and out of position. Yeah, that was certainly the case for large portions of the season. I think since the bye, they've been a lot more stable, you know, been a lot fewer coverage busts. Do you remember how every game, whether it was, you know, New York, whether it was Green Bay, whether it was Chicago, you know, Carolina, Denver, where there would just be like people wide open, just gashing, like 30, 40-yard completions or with no one's within 10 yards of them. There'd be runs where there'd be 20 yards, you know, 10, 15, 20 yards with no contact, just creasing them, nobody there. You're not really seeing that anymore, right? And I think a lot of that is, you know, getting better players, Overshown, for example. You know, Quinn and Williams, obviously, right? You know, making some alignment changes, getting Ezraku more snaps, Clowney more snaps. So I think there is some of that for sure. I think getting rid of a guy like Elam, going Revel, you know, that's certainly been an upgrade in a lot of instances in terms of how they play on the edges there. But I do think there has been a change in terms of they've actually been playing more as a sort of, I'll say it like this, not a disaster class, knock on wood, over the last 4 games. That can obviously change very quickly in terms of just total collapses where it's like, remember that outside run against Denver where it's like a 40-yard touchdown run, 45-yard, 50-yard run, whatever it was, and no one touched him, just a sweep and he scores. Remember against the Carolina Panthers, I think there were 2 plays like that where it's just like no one within 20, 30 yards of the receiver. There are a lot of big runs like that against Carolina too. Had very similar issues against Chicago, very similar issues against Green Bay and New York, right? So it's one of those things where a lot of that stuff that was a real problem the first half of the season pre-bye, at least has been a lot better the second half of the season. Now, it hasn't exactly, certainly against Detroit, it wasn't exactly very good, but if you're looking to really squint, can you see that kind of improvement? Yeah, I guess so. Did you heard right? Don't think I have ever appreciated the challenge of finding decent linebackers like I have this year. Seems like they aren't available, and it may be coach's talk, but I think Shannon could at least allude to room for improvement. It's a turnoff to the fans to hear him try to point out positives for horrible players. Yeah, but he doesn't coach and talk to the media for the fans. He doesn't, right? And I know that's, if you want what the fans want to hear, listen to like Jerry Jones or something like that, right? Because he'll tell, oh yeah, we're, everything's, he'll try and sell you a bill of goods one way or the other. That's what Jerry Jones does. That's what every owner and public facing person should do, right? They should sell you on the vision, sell you on how good things are going to be. Shawnee's not going to do that. He's not doing it for the fans, right? He's doing it for the players. He's trying to build his team and his culture. Right? Did Jimmy Johnson, Bill Parcells, did they ever say anything, for the fans? In terms of Tom Landry, did he ever say or do anything for the fans? No, he's trying to build his team and build his culture, which should lead, hopefully, to better football, which will then make the fans happy. So, yeah, I get your concern and your frustration there, but he has never, and nor should he, from a coaching perspective, openly criticize a player in public. You just don't do that. Because one of the things to understand, guys, and this is for those of you, and I played college football, not NFL, not even remotely close. But I don't think you guys understand how miserable it is being in a post-game film session, win, lose, or draw. Right? It is absolutely awful. I mean, you basically sit there for hours after a game. Everyone's tired, exhausted. For us, it was on Sundays. And they would just coach to pull up the film, and we were offensive linemen, and I didn't start. I was just in the back, so I didn't even experience it public like that. I did it with practice film, but after a game, you just get ripped to shreds. These guys just get ripped to shreds. You could put up 45 points and beat a good team, and you just get ripped to shreds. You put up 3 points and lose to a bad team, get ripped to shreds. Right, across the board, just get ripped to shreds, and it just is a miserable experience. So that's why I like when coaches come out publicly and say good things about players, because we know these players, anyone who's played the game knows that these guys are getting just absolutely eviscerated on film, just getting destroyed on film. So I appreciate when the coaches publicly kind of avoid doing that. All right, this next comment here is from Common Sense Radio 2794. Response to Wilson/Murray, I think the issue is a scheme that exposes players because they're too far off the ball. If you're too far away, it reduces your margin for error. For example, they threw to Gibbs and Murray us in zone. Gibbs had a ton of space underneath. By the time Murray gets close, Gibbs just juked him. That's just one example with no consistent pass rush. You can't play the scheme. You need a strong mic, and we don't have it. Potentially. I mean, that could be. Again, I think it goes more back to, I think, how Eberflus is teaching and developing the linebackers, right? I think that's, to me, that feels more like execution than scheme, right? If you're reacting slow to the running backs in the flat and you miss the tackle, or running back over the middle and you miss the tackle, to me that's more players on executing. But you can also make an argument that the scheme is putting the players in a bad situation, and that's really finer points, really technical details. But that wouldn't be Eberflus. That would be Borgonzi, which is his guy. But I mean, that if you want the linebackers coach, if you want to put a point of blame specific there, that would be at the level of Borgonzi. Kind of. Now, granted, Eberflus is Borgonzi's boss and runs the show there, so you would expect him to correct that if it was an issue. But if you're looking for that detailed, kind of approach at that position, that's more at the individual position coach level. But granted, Eberflus is supposed to be a linebacker guru, so he would hopefully correct that if it was a problem. But I do agree with you. The linebacker position, to me, is the biggest flaw with this defense, obviously, and what Eberflus has done there has not been good at all. Art Vanderlei, 6974, writes, Pickens needs to get a handle on the judgment he displays on the field, leading to penalties and turnovers. It's great he can make all these spectacular plays, but he does need to exercise better judgment, like not fighting for extra yards near the goal line with the ball exposed and getting it punched out. He's done that twice in the last 2 games and was fortunate a teammate was there both times to recover it. He needs to understand where the journey is over and focus on protecting the football. I agree with that. I think that's one of the things that, I love the effort and I love the tenacity, but just you got to know when, okay, it's over now. Just stop. But again, getting back to a little bit of that, I think he has a little bit of T.O. in him, a little bit Des Bryant in him, where it's just like, I'm fighting for every inch, which I love that compared to the alternative, but like you said, you got to know when the journey is over and just eat it. Anchors Away 9893 writes, Jerry Jones can evaluate talent as one of the best at finding diamonds in the rough. He's also an astute businessman. Negatives are the Cowboys operate like a country club. They seem to lack discipline often, which has been my historical gripe with Cowboys in big games. Yeah, I think Shawnee's trying to change that. That's going to be a huge challenge. Cutting Kyer Elam, benching Lamb and Pickens before the Raiders game, benching Diggs before the Packers game, and a few other moves. I think he's trying to change that, practicing outside in the wind and the rain and the cold, right? All those things like that are trying to fix some of those issues, but it's a multi-year process. It's going to take a lot of change, or a lot of roster change too, a lot of upheaval to get that accomplished. Wilson has not been playing well, but if I'm being honest, I'm not entirely sure it's not coaching. The back half of the defense looks lost, man. Linebackers, safeties, and cornerbacks all look lost. No excuse for it when the defensive front is collapsing in the middle of the O-line. Should be making plays. I blame Eberflus. Scheme is hot garbage. Again, I go back to, I think this is a linebacker coaching. I really do. The secondary played poorly. But listen, you play a young secondary against a good offense, you're going to have some rough games for sure. I do think Eberflus's approach in terms of not blitzing, I think can be a little bit concerning, the fact that he avoids it at times. But I think he just looks at his linebacker room and just isn't doing a good job with them in terms of everyone, even with Overshown a little bit. But if you're not named DeMarvin Overshown, specifically Kenneth Murray and Wilson, I think it's less of a high-level macro scheme strategic thing and more of a tactical usage of the linebackers. That's kind of how I'm feeling with this group right now. But to be fair, you put on the film of Murray and Wilson, and it's a lot of really bad over the past month. A lot of really bad. And so it's one of those things I can also understand from the coaching staff where it's like, these guys, what am I going to do with these guys, right? And there were actually snaps, by the way, against the Lions where the Cowboys went 5-man front, Overshown as one linebacker, and Donovan Wilson was one of the other linebackers rolled up into the box, right? So that tells you something, because Wilson, now he's a pretty good box safety, all things considered. He's above average there. But that tells you something where you basically took off the field two veteran linebackers to put a safety in the box. Speaks to a lack of trust they have with those guys. Detroit has a Super Bowl caliber team. You got to give credit to the quality of their team. Yeah, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jared Goff was outstanding. So yeah, 100% credit where credit is due. Positive end, the Cowboys are not a fluke. They were in a game that in years past they would have been a blowout. That is true, right? We saw that in 2023 and in 2024. When things go bad, the Cowboys seem to have collapsed, right? And, even in 2022 a little bit, even though they were a really good team, you look at a few games where, like, when things went bad for Dallas and they lost the game, it just, you saw it weak. They kind of gave up. I know it was a meaningless game, but they gave up against Washington at the end of 2022. Tampa, they kind of just fell apart offensively in week one. So it's one of those things where we've seen it in the past, and certainly in 2023 with the 49ers, with the Cardinals, with the Bills, and then the Packers in the postseason. There are numerous instances against good teams, especially on the road, where things go bad and like, all right, guys, let's pack it in. It's not our day. Not that way with Shoddy, at least the way we saw against the Lions and, of course, the Philadelphia Eagles before that. Now, there have been some instances where they've gotten their butt kicked, but I don't think there's ever been any quit. I think they kept fighting the entire way, and I think that is a credit to Shoddy. Again, changing the more Mike McCarthy mindset. That was one of the issues with McCarthy where, listen, if things are going great, good vibes around, things are going great. But when things go bad, the vibes are gone, and everyone kind of just shuts down. Not getting that, at least up to this point, with Shoddy. And all of their dud games, and there's been a few of them, they fought in every one of them. And they turned what could have been a dud against Green Bay into a tie. They turned what could have been a dud against Philly into a win, right? And listen, against the Bears, if it weren't for some turnovers in the red zone and in the Bears side of the field, that's a close game down the stretch. Absolutely the same thing with the Arizona Cardinals, right? Broncos may be a different story, but the reality is the Cowboys, if it weren't for self-inflicted mistakes and takeaways and things like that in scoring territory, fourth down stops, there's a lot of these games that could have gone very differently, and I think it's a credit to Shoddy and the team's fight. I really do think we should applaud that, and I know that's sort of baseline expectation, but the Cowboys have failed to meet that baseline expectation in years past. All right, that's the comments for today, guys. Obviously, the Cowboys getting ready to prepare for their upcoming opponent against, like I said, the Minnesota Vikings, who looked really good against Washington. Interesting matchup for Dallas, of course, as they look to, obviously try and improve and figure some things out. Going to keep an eye on, of course, Trayvon Diggs, Guyton back at tackle potentially, and CeeDee Lamb with concussion protocol. That will be something to keep an eye on, along with all other Cowboys updates and potential moves at key positions. And I will be here every day to break them down for you guys, starting with tomorrow. And until then, I am Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.